I wanted to welcome everybody to today's webinar on supporting age-out placement initiatives. We appreciate you joining. We know the announcement went out earlier this week, so we appreciate all of you adjusting your calendars and being here. Before we get started with the webinar, I would like to make you aware of the Q&A function at the lower corner of your screen. It is our intent to have the ability to answer questions at the conclusion of our presentation. So if you can please write your questions in the Q&A sections, and we'll be reviewing them and responding to them accordingly. As you may have already heard, we're recording today's webinar, and we'll be posting later for your reference. On August 31st of this year, we issued the Age Out LOI that included students who had previously graduated from the residential school and currently remain there. It also included graduates in the 2023 through 2027 graduating classes. And these individuals in both groups were unmatched with OPWD residential providers for adult placement. We understand that some of the students present with a level of complexity, and today's webinar is really in response to feedback from the residential community to assist all of you in having the ability to meet the needs and be able to respond to this LOI. We're here today to provide a couple initiatives to assist providers being prepared to deliver the necessary services and supports, and we want to take the opportunity to review them with you today. So there are two types of supports we'll be discussing today. One of them is a one-time transition payment, as well as a property reconfiguration concept, which is the ability for our residential providers to reconfigure their property to assist in supporting both individuals currently being served in your residential footprint and those identified in this current Age Out LOI. So who's eligible for this one-time transitional payment? The individuals who are eligible for the one-time transitional payment are a subset of those included in the entire Age Out LOI. And that subset eligible includes people who have aged out from the residential school placement and are unmatched despite previously issued LOIs, and that as a provider, you'll be serving in an existing vacant opportunity. It's also available for people that will be graduating in the 2023 class, who are also currently unmatched with a residential provider and who you'll be able to support in an existing vacant opportunity. And who's going to be eligible for the property reconfiguration? Those will be individuals who will graduate from the residential schools in the graduating years of 2024 through 2027. Property reconfiguration concept will also be available to people who are graduating in 2023 or have previously graduated, but they will either require new development and/or their placement is anticipated to occur after September 15th of 2023. Now that we have reviewed who is eligible for the two different types of supports available, we're going to dive into what each initiative is, and we'll start reviewing what the one-time transitional payment is. So the one-time transitional payment will be a payment of $100,000 for each individual supported by the residential provider. And again, the criteria is, as previously mentioned, includes both unmatched graduates and graduates in the upcoming class of 2023 who have also not been previously matched with an OPWDD provider. To to just review, the $100,000 payment that we're talking about, the transitional payment, is a flat payment. It is consistent amount regardless of what the provider's Medicaid rate is, and the providers will receive this payment in addition to the residential rate. Also, this transitional payment is regardless of where the person lives, is the same for both upstate and downstate providers. Regardless of where you are, if you proceed with this, you will receive this payment. Okay. So the concept is to really assist individuals successfully transitioning. As we mentioned before, we understand the complexity of the individuals in our residential schools, and this $100,000 can allow for a provider, this resource to be used in a variety of ways by providers, including to, increasing wages, offering sign-on or retention bonuses, hiring additional clinical services to support these individuals, providing additional training, purchasing technology to assist the individuals. These are just a few of the options to consider when how you may use these transitional dollars to support individuals. It also gives us the ability to, pilot the possible value-based payment concept. So we're really hopeful to see how this can support you. And to reinforce some concepts that we've previously discussed, the providers to receive the payment of $100,000, you must agree to either serve someone that's been previously graduated, so those will be the 2022 students that remain at the residential schools and previously, and those graduating in this upcoming year of 2023, but that you'll be able to support them no later than September 15th. And those placements that are supported prior to September 15th are supported in an existing backfill opportunity. And we mentioned this previously, but these are individuals that haven't been currently matched through another issued LOI, previous LOI, or that have been identified through the CRO process. Now I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to pass the presentation over to Kevin Valenches as he's going to discuss some of the requirements to receive the payment.
Great. Thank you, Anne Marie. Good morning, everyone. So we just got a couple requirements here in terms of providers' ability to receive the one-time transitional payment. So we're kind of have a couple of ground rules here. One is that the residential provider must commit to serving the person minimally for a period of at least 1 year from the date of placement. And I think Anne Marie talked about it earlier, that placement has to occur no later than September 15th, 2023. The provider must use the funds to prepare programs to support the person. Examples include, but are not limited to, paying higher wages, one-time bonuses to staff, hiring additional clinical expertise, purchasing technology aids. Again, I think the provider is going to have to, recognize that the transitional payment is one time, right, and it's intended to reflect the transitional, costs associated with moving an individual from, an institutional placement to a community-based placement, right? So the expectation is that these are not recurring dollars, and that, these are, the extra, the transitional payment itself is used in a manner that provides for that one-time continuation of supports. As part of the proposal, we'd also want to understand what the one-time funds would be used for. So where the provider must include in, a brief description within the age-out proposal, identifying how the resources, are going to be budgeted. For example, if I'm going to do a bonus to staff, how much of the incentive do I expect to to spend on that line item. How much do I expect if I have to bring in, buy more clinical hours, for example, behavioral specialist is an example. Just try to get that sense. There isn't going to be a detailed spreadsheet. It's just more of a narrative, briefly. And finally, just to highlight that the one-time transitional payment will not be cost reconciled. That's why we want to get that higher level understanding up front to know how those funds would be used. Next slide, please, Anne Marie.
Certainly.
So we also recognize, and I want to kind of clarify this, that the transitional payment is in addition to, right, whatever Medicaid rate the provider would otherwise receive to serve the person. So that could include, high needs funding tiers 1, 2, or 3, depending on the individual's eligibility and the process followed by the provider for that person. I do want to note here, and we'll be talking about this in the coming, several weeks, that we are trying to offer, I'm just going to use, I can't think of a better term right now other than a more streamlined approach for high needs tier 3, that may identify, right, in terms of streamline, what does that mean? We may look to identify a base number of additional hours that would be otherwise available to support the individual, akin to what tiers 1 and 2 do, right? Tier 1 is 1,000 extra hours. Tier 2 is 2,000. We're looking to say that maybe rather than leaving it open-ended, which I think does create some, question and need for ongoing review, can we prescribe a threshold number that we'd be, that could help, I think, providers begin to plan. Again, there's going to be flexibility in tier 3, at the end of the day, but the goal is to try to help maybe direct the thought and planning process. And more will come on that revision, in the next several weeks. We'd also recognize that, in addition to the transitional payment, there may be some modest changes that need to be made to the physical plant space where the individual will live, right? And again, it's in an existing backfill, right? We're not talking about new development for those individuals that qualify for the transitional payment. So we're looking to support and offer the opportunity for modest renovations, $30,000 or less, that would be paid by voluntary preservation funds, as long as the renovations are completed prior to occupancy. And again, what we're saying here is, depending on what your proposal calls for and when you would, look to support the individual, those modest renovations would have to be accomplished prior to. And when we talk about modest, right, and we're trying to clarify this here, that the renovations themselves must be necessary solely to accommodate the individual and the residents. We're not talking about like a brand new roof or a brand new kitchen, right? It's, what changes need to be made to make sure that the individual can be, safely served in that environment.
Thank you, Kevin. So just a couple additional items just want to talk about to receive requirements for the one-time payment. When you submit your proposals, and I'll discuss this a little bit later, but I'll let people know now. The age-out LOI that we issued had indicated that proposals were due to the regional field office on October 27th of this year. We're going to be extending the proposal submission due date to November 3rd. Right, so for those providers interested in supporting individuals in backfills and receiving this one-time payment by September 15th, those proposals should come in by November 3rd of this year. And then we will be reviewing those proposals, evaluating them, and making awards on them by January 31st. So you'll know by the end of January 31st whether this is being supported for you. The transitional payments will be awarded, so you'll receive the payment, and it'll occur before April 1st of 2023. And so to understand that you may, depending on when you're supporting the person, you may be receiving that that funding in advance of the placement of the individual. And that will allow you to, if you're utilizing it, let's say for bonuses, it'll allow you to get out there to, hire, bring on board, provide the support so you're prepared to transition the person into your program. You're agreeing that you understand that this is one-time funds. And so you'll manage the service provision within the subsequent periods with amounts, for reimbursements. As we have said several times, or I've said several times, this placement must occur on or before September 15th. So if you get the payment, if you're awarded, you'll receive this payment in April or prior to. And if for some reason you're not able to effectuate that placement by September 15th, you need to understand that we will need to recoup that funding back. And similarly, one of the expectations, and it was on one of the previous slides, the expectation is that the provider will successfully and safely support the individual, for at least 1 year. We anticipate it being much longer, but that transitional year that you're supporting them throughout appropriately. And if for any reason that the individual is you're not able to continue to support them in that first year, we also will be required to recoup the payment with this interest. So now we're going to transition from the one-time payment, and we're going to start talking about the property reconfiguration for new opportunities. And as a reminder, because we talked about this in earlier slides, the property reconfiguration is for people who graduated, who will be graduating in the 2024 through 2027 graduating classes. They could also be individuals that are graduating this year in 2023 or previously graduated, but that you're not able to place by 9/15 into an existing opportunity. So I'm going to pause again. I'm going to pass this back to Kevin to kind of go into some of the flexibility being afforded with this requirement.
Thanks again, Anne Marie. This will be the last time you'll hear me. I've got like another slide or two here, so be good for all of us. So, really, we're trying to just put some clarity around what we mean by the property reconfiguration. Again, this is separate and apart from, the transitional incentive, right? It's one or the other. There isn't the flexibility being offered, between the two. So Anne Marie talked about in the slide before about the eligibility, differences between the two options. And in this option, what we're looking to do is to allow new development, within established thresholds, clearly, for the number of individuals awarded with the age-out LOI, and it'll be accomplished via the PPA process, right? So that's still going to follow the existing processes that are established for, and thresholds, guidelines that are established and we all, work under and within today. The new development itself can be utilized to support people who transition from, the residential schools, and or existing people who require, an alternative environment. So, for example, maybe in an existing program residence, you have a home that you want to be able to serve these younger individuals in from the residential school program, and you have a group of people who may be, aged and may have some mobility concerns in an existing residence, but you think that existing residence that's actually being used to support people is something that would be good for this younger, group of individuals. What we're saying here is we're allowing new development to occur for that older group, right? And allow you to, make that transition to make that existing program open and livable for, the younger cohort of individuals. So it's allowing, for some degree of flexibility here. It's not, the new development isn't exclusively limited only to the individuals who are part of the LOI. So we're allowing for that kind of flow and, kind of reuse of property, knowing that there may be needs, of existing residents that may be changing. Okay, so it's allowing for some flexibility in that regard. So, we're also saying here that if the existing people will be utilizing the new development, the age out must be accessing the backfill opportunities. Next slide, please. In addition to new development, we'll also support, as I said earlier, I kind of unveiled everything at once. We'll support modest renovations for health and safety via the PPA, again, to the current housing stock. Just again, in that example I had given where you had a group of young folks who were coming out of the residential school program, a group of people, older, me, and I'm not going to call out anyone else, but, several Kevins who are, aging and may have, mobility issues, to allow for that kind of, give and take. We understand that, not every home is immediately available for a person, and we're recognizing that, some renovations may also have to occur in the existing residence in which you're going to transition those individuals. Again, we can't stress this enough, right? These flexibilities are one or the other; they're not both. So, and to help keep it simple, if you have a group of individuals who are, part of the 2024 to 2027 age out classes, right? This is really the option that's available for them is that reconfiguration. There isn't also going to be, a similar one-time transitional support payment.
So thank you, Kevin. I just want to highlight, the flexibility that's being here. I know that working with many of the provider community, they've asked for some creativity and understanding that they've wanted to right size their current residential stock to serve their existing, the people they existingly support. And this will allow that flexibility as well as, utilizing their current housing stock for individuals that are aging out of school. And I think the flexibility of both the new dollars as well as some modest renovation funding for health and safety really does give some opportunities here that I know that providers have requested in the past. So, so with that said, and just to effectuate, to clearly articulate what I mentioned before, we are extending the due date for proposals for the age out LOI so that you can incorporate both the one-time transitional payments and or the property reconfigurations that we discussed today. So the new date for the age out proposals to the regional office will be November 3rd of this year. And so that is our part of the presentation. I see some questions in the chat box. So if you give us a moment to review them, we'll come back momentarily and give you some answers to those. So thank you. Okay, everybody, we're gonna start to answer the questions. We thank you for your patience. Abiba, do you want to start with some of the answers?
Sure, Anne-Marie, can you hear me?
I sure can.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for giving us an opportunity just to read through the questions here. And some of the questions we're just going to have to take back, but we'll certainly make sure that we respond directly to the group. So I think the first question was, if an agency was a residential school who did not plan for a 2023 or prior graduate initially, but will now plan for the graduate in the new LOI, would they be eligible for the one-time payment? And so we just want to be clear, and again, this is articulated in the PowerPoint, which we will share. Agencies who are planning for an individual who has already aged out, right? So these are folks that may have been included in prior years' LOIs that were not matched with a provider who remained in the residential school, or any individual who is scheduled to age out in 2023, where a provider has the ability to support that individual in a vacancy or backfill by September 15th of 2023, would be eligible for the one-time payment. The second question is, would this one-time payment be retroactive to a graduate that was placed in a backfill this past June? And the answer is no. The one-time payment is only available for individuals who remain unmatched and have completed their educational programming in previous years, or those who will be graduating in 2023 who have not been matched with a provider and certainly would have to be placed by the date that we identified in the presentation. Will we be able to get a copy of the PowerPoint? We noted yes to this question. The next question here is, what if a person is hospitalized within the first year? Does that affect the transitional one-time payment? Or if a family or person decides to move the individual out rather than the agency initiating, does that affect the one-time transitional payment? And we just want to be clear here. We certainly know that there may be circumstances where individuals may need to be supported temporarily in a hospital, right? But we just want to make sure that there is no discharge that is initiated by the provider here, right? It's important that providers be using these transitional payments in the addition to the higher needs funding if an individual is eligible, to identify the necessary supports, clinical supports, direct care supports. And so it's important that the provider not initiate the discharge, within the year period that was outlined in the presentation. The next question says, please clarify, are all letters of intent for 25 to 27 now due by 11/3? In the recently issued LOI, we included both individuals who have completed their educational programming and remain in the residential school setting because they have not been matched with a provider. And then we also included the prospective grads, right? So those are individuals who are completing their educational programming in 2024 through 2027. And so what we're noting is that we are extending the submission of the proposals to plan for those individuals noted in the LOI to November 3rd. The initial due date for the proposals, I believe, was October 27th. Given that we're having this webinar today, we've extended that date by a week. I think the next question here is property reconfiguration. Does flexibility include or internal moves and thus may be needed for two sites? For example, the site renovation needed to support the new age out and the site in which an existing person may be moved to which we would also need a renovation. I believe that's the question. And so we want to make sure that the renovations that are completed using the funds that was described in the LOI are used to support the post-grads, right? The intent is really to make sure that the minor renovations that are completed it really leads to the placement and support of an age out. And so if the renovations need to be made to 2 sites to be able to support that, that clearly needs to be outlined, because we just want to make sure that those that remain unmatched in those previous LOIs are supported. Can these young people be placed in IRAs and or ICS? Yes. The goal here is for providers to develop plans to support individuals, obviously, in the most integrated, least restrictive setting. So to the extent that that is an existing IRA or ICF in the community, we want to make sure that that's noted in the proposal that's submitted. And Kevin, just correct me if I'm wrong there. We can take this offline. The one-time payments, are they being allocated to ICF as well, or just IRAs?
Well, I don't think we made a distinction, right? I mean, as long as the person is transitioning, you know, we recognize the need for those, you know, enhanced transitional supports. Again, they're one time, right? So next year they're not going to continue, but the point would be, you know, from what I've, you know, when we've talked about this, the expectation would be that it would be, you know, the transition from the school program is the critical element here. I don't think that we opined on the where.
Great, thank you for that clarification, Kevin. I think the next question here is, are you still able to screen potential candidates or just matched? I'm not entirely sure what that question is, but I'm going to take a stab at answering it. Absolutely. I think that if providers submit a proposal outlining that they plan on supporting someone who has completed their educational programming and remains in the residential school, all of those screening and, you know, engagement of the residential school staff and the family, like all of those typical planning processes are still expected, right? We want to make sure that, you know, providers have the ability to really identify whether or not they can support the needs of the individual, and that's often achieved through screening. And so the expectation would be to, you know, thoroughly screen the individuals who remain unmatched, and certainly those who will be completing their educational programming in 2023 who are eligible for the one-time payment. The next question here that I see, will this presentation be made available? I believe we responded to that. Can we somehow speed up the PPA process? In this market, it takes too long. Again, I think that, you know, depending on the circumstances, right, we may have to go back out and oftentimes request additional information from providers. It's certainly our intent to make sure that, you know, any PPAs that are requested are approved and issued as soon as possible, but I understand that there's often delays. You know, it's hard to respond to that question, you know, broadly with a yes, but it's certainly our intent to make sure that we're able to move forward and issue those PPAs in a timely manner. Is there going to be
Aviva?
Oh, did I skip one? Sorry. Thanks, Kevin.
No, it's Kevin. Just real quick, on that point, I mean, I understand the expedited, but I want to clarify what we indicated earlier for those where, you know, those individuals that would otherwise, you know, qualify if they're, you know, placed by the provider by 9/15/2023, right? We clearly indicated that we were going to pay for the modest renovations through voluntary preservation funds, which would really necessitate like a VP contract between the provider and us. I think Christine can clarify, but that it's a slightly different process than simply the PPA review. So again, I think that there is an expedited process there.
Thanks, Kevin. So we'll certainly go through the questions and make sure that the ones that we haven't responded to that we do, but I just want to try to make sure that I respond to as much as I can here. I think the next question that I see, we have someone that attends a residential school moving into our IRA. We are supporting them as they finish up their schooling. They graduate in 2023. Would we be eligible for the one-time payment? And again, I think our intent was to support folks who were not matched. I think that this question might mean that the provider had previously identified their interest in supporting this individual in a previous LOI. So I think I just want to take this one back. We have a number of students that already have a match with an organization, however, do not have a transition timeline. What will prevent an agency from skipping those students that they have already committed to and accepting a student that does not have a match to be able to get this funding? Well, again, I mean, I'm hoping, right, that providers will honor their commitments, right? The regional offices certainly know the individuals that providers have selected, right? And we would absolutely need to really have a really solid understanding of why a provider is pulling away from previous commitments. You know, I'm really hoping that, you know, that the reason that any one provider would sort of pull back a previous commitment is not solely based on the fact that this one-time transitional payment is being made available, right? But we certainly already have that information, and to the extent that that's happening, you know, we certainly would need to address that on a case-by-case basis.
And Abiba, if I could just, you know, add to that a little bit, you know, the individuals eligible, you know, are a very specific group, and you know, each of the LOIs issued has statistical information identifying those previously graduated students and those in the 2023 year that were not matched. Those are the ones that are eligible for the one-time transitional payment, and because those were the ones included in the LOI. Matched individuals were not included in the LOI, so they are not eligible for the payment. So hopefully, you know, the provider can serve the people they've committed to and additional individuals.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Is there going to be any flexibility to allow providers to place individuals from substantial need list as well, since many of those individuals have similarly high needs, or individuals on the emergency need list who are not or did not age out of residential schools? So again, the purpose of today's presentation is to really focus on the individuals in the residential schools, right? The one-time transitional payment that's being described here is only available to those who are supporting individuals who were included in the LOI that remain unmatched or who will complete their educational programming by August of 2023, with the expectation that the provider place the individual in a vacancy or backfill by September 15th. Only the age outs are eligible for the one-time transitional payment. I think that's all the questions that I see on my end. You know, obviously we'll take a look at all of the questions that were submitted, and to the extent that there were one or two or a couple missed, you know, we will certainly review that and do our best to respond. Anne Marie, anything else?
Nope, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for attending. You know, if you have additional questions related to this, there is the residential school mailboxes that the LOI went out on, and you can send them in as well. And as Abiba said, we'll respond to any that we haven't already. and appreciate your involvement today. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful weekend.